Maureen Self, Head of Investment Solutions at Bill Swiss. Today's topic is crucial for any entrepreneur. It's about planning your business exit strategy. Is it time to step back from your business and maybe sell, merge, or even transition your business into new hands? What are some of the complexities and the key considerations when it comes to crafting an effective exit strategy? Joining me to discuss all of this is Matias Primus, Head of M&A at Bill Swiss, which is one of the bank's key competence centers, which caters to a wide range of corporate finance solutions for entrepreneurs and mid-market company owners in Europe and Switzerland. Matias, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Mary.
Great. Matias, your work covers mainly mid-market M&A activities in Switzerland and Europe. So maybe a good place to start is the economic landscape in Europe. I mean, in the last 2 years, Europe has gone through significant challenges, starting with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, an energy crisis, but also a divided global economy. A soft landing is now in reach, and that is being helped by improving business and consumer sentiment, but also resilient labor markets. But despite all of this, Europe still faces structural challenges such as low productivity, an aging population, climate change, but also global fragmentation. So how does this translate into M&A activities? What are some of the themes that we're seeing in the mid-market space in Switzerland and Europe?
Mm-hmm. This is indeed a very good question. When you look at the market sentiment in M&A in the last 2 years, for instance, you have seen that the deal count and also the deal volumes have indeed come down. And this was mainly driven by the uncertainties that you have just mentioned, like the Ukraine war, the inflation that was related also to the Ukraine war, the overall economic sentiment that is currently difficult still to assess, what different impacts of in different markets are on the respective businesses. So when you look, for instance, at strategic buyers are looking at cash flows usually, and they are looking, on the impact, on an impact on profitability when they are doing acquisitions. Currently, they don't have, a clear view on what the impact is on the current market sentiment on any transactions they are doing. So with respect to cash flows and also profitability. So that means that executive boards are currently rather prudent in doing such acquisitions, since they don't have a clear view on the overall market sentiment. That's one point. That's one aspect. Another aspect that you should consider is when you look at the private equity segment, which is also a very important, crowd of investors for such transactions. They are usually financing a majority of their transactions with debt financing. And when you look at the debt financing, this is associated with interest costs, and the interest rates have gone up. So this has increased their financing cost. This has then, basically made it more difficult for them to pay higher prices in terms of transaction prices. And that's why we currently have a deviation between the sellers' expectations in terms of valuations, since the sellers kept their pre-interest hike expectations in terms of pricing. And also, the price expectations that buyers are prepared to pay. This we will see in the next couple of months how this is evolving.
You've mentioned valuation discrepancies, so I want to touch on that. These valuation discrepancies we're seeing between buyers and sellers, is that more broad-based, or are there sector dynamics at play?
There are indeed certain sector dynamics. So when you look at defensive sectors, for instance, when you look at pharmaceutical or IT sectors, software and so on, these are usually sectors that are less debt financed. So you don't have the strong impact of these higher interest rates. So there's a lot more stability, and that's what is reflected in the valuations in the market currently, that these sectors have developed quite decently. And you don't see a major hit on the valuations. When you look at other sectors, one example would be consumer goods. This is really depending on consumer spending. And since, many consumers are not that confident, where the economic is going to, consumer spending went down. This is not only for classical consumer goods, but also when you look at building materials, for instance. Building materials is a sector where you have to do a lot of spending as a private consumer, for instance, and that's where you save first when you have difficulties in terms of market sentiment and so on. So there are indeed differences, and you have also seen a major hit in terms of valuations when you look at consumer goods, building materials, and certain other sectors. So this needs to be observed also in the next couple of months.
And that's very interesting, the dynamics that you mentioned about the last couple of years. Let's talk about 2024. What is the outlook? What are you seeing?
Mm-hmm. What we have already seen in Q1 2024 is that the M&A market is rebounding. So deals are up about 30% approximately. And we also see, when you look at the private equity side, for instance, there is a huge amount of money on the sideline. I think by end of 2023, it was about $2.5 trillion in funds available on the sideline. And we also see, that executive boards are more and more confident that the economy is recovering. So we also see, that when you put yourself in the shoes of a CEO, for instance, or let's say a CFO of a company, they are, as I said, looking at cash flows, they are looking at profitability and so on, and they have a clearer view now that the rates are coming down and that the overall market sentiment is tending to improve. They have a better view on M&A transactions and the potential impact on their balance sheets. And this is actually very good news. I've also just recently seen, yesterday or 2 days ago, the German government has also explained, that they have a much better view now on the German economy, for instance, which is very important for Europe. So they have high expectations in the growth, for instance, and this is then directly having an impact also on the M&A activity, which we'll see next couple of months.
That's very interesting. You talked about the improving confidence in executive boards, and you also mentioned sort of dry powder as well that's waiting to be deployed and cash flows. Many of our viewers of this show are business owners, and some of them might actually be thinking about their exit strategy from their businesses. So speaking about exit strategies, from your perspective, can you talk to us about what that entails in M&A?
Well, this is indeed a very good question, and it has so many different facets, in a sense that every business is very individual, as individual as the respective owner. So there is not the one strategy that you can think of that you can apply. It is more about that business owners should ask themselves, different questions in terms of the strategy. And one of the questions is indeed, how is my company positioned? How well is it doing in terms of profitability, in terms of product positioning, in terms of sales, and so on. Another one is, how well the company is positioned towards competition. And also if there's the need to sell even the company because competition has changed, for instance. So there are many different aspects that you should consider in terms of strategy. And this has to be reviewed, individually for every single business, what the right strategy is, basically.
And what other aspects should be considered when thinking about planning an exit strategy?
There are really many aspects that you should consider. On one hand, many business owners are considering to give the company to other family members within the family, like their children, can also be brothers or sisters, and so on. One question I often don't see being asked by respective business owners is, are my children, for instance, capable of running a business? And another question, which I often also don't see, is them asking, are my children willing to take over the company? Today's generations are much more flexible than previous generations in that regard, usually. But it is still something that can only recommend that you consider these aspects also from a business owner perspective. Other topics could be that many owners are thinking that their management should buy the company. But usually you have to make concessions in terms of price, valuation, and so on, because many of these managers don't have the money often to buy the company at the price that you as an owner wants to have. So there are often differences that you need to address. What is also often an option for business owners is that they think about bringing the company into a foundation to secure the company for the next generations, basically. What many owners do not consider in that respect is that you have limitations when you are setting up foundations. And so many people Many owners are thinking about this option, but are declining it later on when they see the limitations that they have. And then a fourth option is definitely, the sale of the company or the partial sale of the company. But this is also something, where you have to set up a sales process that fits your needs, basically, as an owner. And in that respect, it's also important if you are running a sales process, if you want to have a kind of single negotiation with a potential buyer, or if you want to have an auction process. You should look at this in the context of price. When you have an auction process, for instance, then you have a much higher price usually than when selling to one party with to negotiate. And you have a lot higher, a much higher transaction certainty when you have an auction process because you are building alternatives.
So a lot of things to consider when planning an exit strategy.
Definitely.
Now, one thing that's clear is while it's never easy finding the right time, it sounds to me like a lot of preparation is important. Planning an exit strategy is like planning for a big life event, and starting early sounds like that could be a good strategy because that would also potentially give time to enhance the value of the business, to mitigate any risks, and to obviously wait for an optimal time to sell the business. In that context, how should business owners approach the planning phase?
Well, you already mentioned some topics that are really important. First of all, early planning is very important. That means, every owner is completely different in terms of how much time it takes him or her to think about how they want to, pass on a company. Many owners have to find themselves first. There are many psychological aspects. So it is, on one hand, an owner should do an own assessment. What is important in terms of a sale or of succession of a company? Is it that an owner wants to maximize the price? This could be one option. Another option is that it's important, to find the best haven for the employees. Another option, could also be that they want to avoid to fall into kind of black hole post-retirement and so on. So there are many different aspects. And as I said, the most important aspect is for the owner to recognize own needs. And this, for most owners, I can tell you, really takes time. It's a long psychological process. I have also seen owners, who said at an age of 55 or 60, click, I want to sell now, that's it. But usually it takes some time to find, your own preferences. And usually, most owners also have difficulties to go through this process on their own. So it's good to have a sparring partner. It can be, a good friend who knows these activities, who knows how a succession could be planned. It could be, a family member that is a good sparring partner. Also, it could also be, an advisor. It really depends on the respective situation, what you really need, and I can only recommend to start early. And especially one thing I want to mention is I've often recognized if you wait too long for selling a company, for instance, let's say when you want to sell a company at 70 or 75 or 80, this is usually way too late because when you're working for your company that you have developed yourself, let's say for 30, 40 years, the market is changing around you. You have yourself different needs, different preferences that have developed over time. And so I can only recommend that you do also this retirement planning early enough. And usually it's not only selling or passing on a company, it's also the own retirement planning that should be taken into consideration.
What about valuations?
Well, valuation, that's a very broad topic. Usually, when you look at this quite tactically, a valuation is usually done in a professional way with different methodologies. These methodologies are looking at the company itself, how it's positioned in terms of profitability, future return possibilities. It's also about the macroeconomic environment. So you bring together the macroeconomic environment with the company financials, fundamentals, and so on. So the valuation is, in fact, only a kind of indication for yourself as an owner. And it can be a basis for discussion between you as a business owner and the respective buyer. Finally, the aspects that you are considering in terms of the valuation are important for the new owner in their consideration of, what they are prepared to pay in terms of a price, and to bring these price expectations together with yours. So as I said, it's very important to know that valuation is good to have, and it's also a good basis for the negotiation between the seller and the respective buyer, but it is not defining the price, just to make this very clear.
So let's take it a little more concrete. Let's imagine that we have a business owner who's decided to exit. What is the logical next step?
The logical next step is indeed that the business owner is identifying his or her own preferences in terms of what type of process. Is it an auction process? Is it a single negotiation? What do I want to achieve with my transaction? Is it that I just want to pass on the company within the family? Do I want to have a kind of foundation? Is it important, that the management is buying it? Or is it really a sale? And if it's a sale, for instance, then it's very important to identify the preferences for yourself if you want to have a maximization or if other aspects of your transaction are more important to you. So I come back to what I said before. Early planning is very important, that you identify these preferences. And then the next step, you should identify for yourself if you need help for this or if you can do it on your own. What you should really consider when doing such transactions are much more complex than you think, in the beginning. So you have to define the strategy on one hand, and you have to when you do a sale process, for instance, you have to have control over this entire process. And what you should keep in mind is, usually business owners know their own business extremely well. But selling a business or passing it on to a different generation or whatever is an entirely different thing. And it's good that the owner knows his or her business very well, but people should also consider what they need for such a transaction and what they cannot cover by themselves. And such transaction is also strongly interfering your day-to-day operations while doing such transaction, because there are so many additional work streams on top of your operation activities that it's definitely worthwhile to consider if you can do it yourself, or if you need someone that can really help you for combining the transaction process with your operational needs.
Can you share an example of these aspects?
Yes, when you look at, for instance, a sale process, you're usually approaching a large number of different potential investors. So first of all, you have to define the strategy, how you want to approach the market. Mm-hmm. And this also includes some tactics and so on. Then you have to prepare certain deliverables. The market is, when you are sending a company, then you have to bring the market up to speed in terms of knowledge. You know your company as a business owner extremely well, but potential buyers don't know it at all. So you have to imagine, that to bring the respective buyers up to speed, you need information documentation, like an information memorandum or a business presentation. And there are certain standards in the market that you should usually meet. So these presentations or these information memorandums, they usually cover topics like a description of the business, a description of the market, a description of the financials, historic financials, future financials, description of the management, and so on. So there are various aspects. And as I said, this is to bring the respective potential buyers up to speed. And this is, also true for finding the respective potential investors. It is not that they are just, out there and are waiting, for deals. It is more that you have to find out yourself as a business owner what the right buyers, what are the right buyers for your business, basically. Mm-hmm. So this needs a decent search for the respective buyers. It can be a European search, it can be a local search, it can be a global search. So this needs to be defined in the beginning, and then you choose the respective investors that you want to approach. And then you have to put them into a framework that they are all, giving you, making offers to you at the same time, at the same, you send usually requests what their offer should cover and so on. So you should tell them exactly what you need by when and what decisions they have to take on their side to consume the transaction, for instance. And then in the next step, you also have to show them, the diligence materials, because, as I said, the business owner knows the company quite well. But in terms of the buyer, They want to know exactly what risks they are incurring when they are buying the company. So you have to set up a data room to market standard, basically. You have to set up management presentation where they can then show how they want to live the strategy that is explained in the respective information memorandum. And then finally, after all, when they have also sent you the final offers, you have to do negotiations. And this is also a very, very important part that needs to be covered.
So I imagine negotiation is a big part, as you just mentioned.
That's a very big part because it's not only about price, the commercial aspects, but it's also very important, that you cover, the conditions and terms properly. So it's very important also to have the legal framework in the right shape, like the contractual framework, share purchase agreements, asset purchase agreements, and so on. Need a good lawyer for this because you also incur liabilities when you are selling a company. A buyer wants to have certain representations and warranties, and usually you build a kind of liability framework in the legal documentation of the transaction that is limiting your liability towards the buyer. So this has to be properly set up just to protect you. And so it's not only the price that is important. When let's say the liability is very high but the price is good, then it can even be more important for you to have less liability and even a little bit lower price than just having optimized everything depending on the respective situation. This is very important to consider.
Matias, this has been incredibly insightful. Before we close out, are there any final tips for our viewers?
Well, as I pointed out before, I think it's really very important that you as a business owner really take the time, to identify your own preferences, to plan the exit or the succession properly, and also to, that you discuss if you want to pass on the company within your family, that you also discuss openly in the family if the family members can, take over the company, if they can run the company, and especially also if they are willing to run the company.
Thank you, Matias. So as we wrap up today, there's a couple of takeaways that I'd like to emphasize. I think for me, one of the things I've heard is planning your exit strategy is crucial. It's important to define the end goal, to start early, and make sure that your business is primed to deliver its highest value or its best value, and surround yourself with the right advisors to help you through that process.
Exactly.
And on that note, Matias, it's been great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time and expertise.
Well, it was really a pleasure to be here, and thank you also for inviting me for this session.
You're very welcome.